$270,000. By tomorrow, my husband ordered, tossing the folder with his mother's debts at me. Refuse, and you'll regret it, he added, not even looking at me. I nodded. All right, Tavarius. 6 hours later, the children and I were sitting on a plane. When they stormed into the apartment that evening looking for the money, all they found were empty rooms and an envelope on the table. My mother-in-law tore it open first and screamed so loud that the crystal chandelier above the dining table trembled. Before we dive into this fascinating story, please write in the comments which state or country you are joining us from. It is an honor for me to know who is on air with me right now. Happy listening. Tavarius came back earlier than usual at 6:45 while I was still snapping green beans for supper. The key turned in the lock with that particular sharpness that always signaled trouble. Over 15 years, I had learned to distinguish the shades of his mood by the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. A tired shuffle meant the day had been a waste. Sharp, measured steps spoke of a successful deal, while a heavy tread with pauses overshadowed another lecture. Today, the steps were fast and nervous, as if he were running from someone or rushing toward something important. "Giselle, get in here!" he yelled from the entryway, not even taking off his shoes. Wiping my hands on a floral apron I'd bought before we were even married, I walked into the hall. Tavarius stood in the middle of the corridor in his eternal leather jacket, holding a thick folder of papers under his arm. Sweat glistened on his reddish face, even though May had been cool in Chicago. "To the kitchen!" he snapped, brushing past me. In the kitchen, he slammed the folder onto the table so hard it burst open, and promissory notes, contracts, and receipts with official seals fanned out across the surface. "Mama got herself in a bind," he exhaled, sinking heavily onto a stool. "Up to her neck, the old fool." I silently poured him water from the pitcher and watched as he downed it in one gulp, setting the glass down with such a clatter that the dishes in the drying rack rattled. "Her friend Bernice, it's some kind of investment cooperative, Wealth Builders or something. They promised 30% annual returns. Mama threw everything in there, her savings, her pension funds, and she even borrowed from Bishop." Bishop. That name was spoken in hushed tones in our neighborhood on the South Side. He was the kind of man you only borrowed from in a worst-case scenario, and you always paid back on time. "How much?" I asked quietly. $270,000. Tavarius rubbed his face with his palms. "With interest, it's already $270 and growing every day." Perched on the edge of a chair, I stared at the papers scattered across the table, trying to comprehend this impossible sum of $270,000, a number that was impossible to imagine in our kitchen, with its cracked tiles above the stove and dripping faucet. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to the bank." Tavarius raised his eyes to mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw not just his usual irritation, but something resembling fear. "Withdraw everything in the accounts, every single cent." "Tavarius, but I don't have that kind of money." "You do," he interrupted harshly. "Your mother's house money. I made some calls. It's $68,000 minimum, plus her jewelry, the stuff you claimed you never found. Don't lie to me, Giselle. I know everything." My heart plummeted. For 3 years, I was sure I had been clever enough. All those years, that money had sat in a secret account as my only safety net, the only thing that belonged solely to me. "That's still not $270,000, I tried to object. "You'll get a loan for the rest, or borrow it, or sell a kidney. I don't care." He stood up, looming over me. "Tomorrow by evening, the money needs to be there. All $270. Otherwise..." "Otherwise what?" The words slipped out unexpectedly, even to myself. Tavarius froze. In 15 years, I had never contradicted him in such a tone. His face slowly flushed a dark, angry red. "Otherwise," he hissed through his teeth, "you will regret you were ever born. I won't let you live. And don't you think about going anywhere. I'll find you anywhere. You have kids. Don't forget." With those words, he walked out of the kitchen, and a minute later, the bedroom door slammed shut. Left alone in the silence, I looked at the papers scattered on the table, promissory notes with sums ending in multiple zeros, a loan agreement signed in my mother-in-law's sweeping handwriting, a photocopy of her ID. Ophelia May Van, born in 1958. The woman who had called me a freeloader and good-for-nothing for 15 years, checked receipts from the grocery store, and lectured me for every extra purchase, convincing Tavarius that I should be grateful just to live in their apartment. And now, this woman owed $270,000 to some gangsters, and I was supposed to pay for it with my money. Money I had hidden for 3 years, as my last hope for a different life. The night passed without sleep. I lay on my side of the bed, listening to Tavarius snore and giving in to memories. I remembered myself at 24, a quality assurance engineer with honors, dreaming of a career in a research institute. I remembered how Tavarius courted me, bringing sweet potato pies from the bakery and taking me to the movies to see romantic dramas, promising he'd go to the ends of the earth with me. The ends of the earth turned out to be his mother's 3-bedroom apartment in a crowded neighborhood. By morning, the decision had ripened on its own. I would not pay my mother-in-law's debts. I would no longer live in fear and humiliation. I wouldn't let them squeeze the last drop out of me and throw me away like a used lemon. Tavarius left for work at 7:30, tossing over his shoulder, "I expect you this evening with the money. Don't you dare cross me." I walked him to the door and nodded obediently, just as I had nodded all these 15 years. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, I pulled an old prepaid burner phone from my hiding spot and dialed Danessa's number. "Hello, Nessie, it's me. Listen carefully and don't interrupt." Danessa listened silently and only at the end asked, "Are you sure? This is forever, Zell. There's no turning back." "I don't have a way back." I looked out the window at the gray courtyard with its slanted sandbox. "Yesterday he threatened that I'd regret being born. Nessie, I've regretted it for 15 years. "Fly down here," my friend said decisively. "Take the kids and fly down today. I have a friend who's a realtor. She'll help with housing. We'll figure something out for work. Just get out of there." Hanging up, I looked around, realizing I didn't have much time before Tavarius returned. I had about 10 hours to do everything. First, I went onto the airline website on my son Darius's tablet and found a flight from Chicago O'Hare to Savannah, Georgia, departing at 6:40 p.m. I paid for 3 one-way tickets with the secret debit card I kept in an old shoebox on the top shelf of the closet. "Ma, what are you doing?" Darius stuck his head out of his room, hair messy from sleep. "Get dressed, son. We're flying to Auntie Danessa's near the ocean. Today." He looked surprised. "What about Pop?" "Pop? Pop will come later," I lied, looking away. "Go wake up Imani and pack your things, just for a week or so." While the children were packing, I rushed around the apartment, stuffing the absolute essentials into 2 old suitcases, documents I managed to find, some clothes for the first few days, medicine, photos of my mom, and an old jewelry box. Not the expensive stuff I had already sold, but simple trinkets Tavarius had given me in the early years of our marriage, back when he still remembered birthdays. "Mama, why do we need so many things for a week?" Imani stood in the doorway, clutching her favorite plush bunny. "Just in case, baby girl, in case we get delayed." At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I left the house and went downtown to a mobile store where I bought the simplest phone with buttons, no GPS, no tracking. Then I stopped by the bank, withdrew some cash, and left the rest on the card. The teller looked surprised at the amount, but didn't say anything. I returned home by 3 o'clock and found the children already packed. They were sitting in the living room in front of the TV. "Well, ready for an adventure?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. "Ma?" Darius looked at me intently with his serious dark brown eyes, so similar to mine. "We're not going for a week, are we?" Sitting down next to him on the sofa, I hugged my son around the shoulders. "Darius, you're big now, almost 16. You see how we live. You see how your father is, how he treats me, and you." "I see," my son answered quietly. I've seen it for a long time. I can't take it anymore either. I don't want to. We're leaving, son. For good. To Auntie Danessa's in Georgia. We're starting a new life. And Daddy? Asked Imani, hugging her bunny tight. Daddy will stay here with Grandma, and there won't be any more yelling. Hope flashed in my daughter's eyes. There won't? No, honey, I promise. At 5 o'clock, we left the building with 2 suitcases, 3 backpacks, and my old umbrella. I called a rideshare using an app on a new number, and the driver helped load our things. To the airport, I said, settling into the back seat between the children. Before leaving, I had left an envelope on the kitchen table. I had thought for a long time about what to write. I wrote 3 pages and tore them all up. In the end, I took a blank sheet from Imani's notebook and wrote 7 words, short and clear. No explanations, no excuses. For 15 years, I had made excuses for every step I took. Enough. On the plane, when takeoff was announced, I turned off both phones, the old one and the new one. Darius sat by the window, Imani in the middle, clutching my hand. Scared? I asked my daughter. A little, but a good kind of scared. I understood what she meant because I was scared too, but it wasn't that sticky, humiliating fear I had lived in for the last few years. It was the fear of heights, of flight, of the unknown, the fear of freedom. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted off the ground, leaving behind the gray spring of Chicago, the 3-bedroom apartment in the crowded neighborhood, 15 years of my life, and the envelope on the kitchen table. In the evening, Tavarius would return home and find an empty apartment. He would run through the rooms, check the closets, and call his mother. Ophelia May would rush over in 20 minutes. I knew her habits, and let herself in without knocking with her own key, starting to wail immediately. I told you she was ungrateful. I warned you. She wouldn't notice the envelope on the table right away, but when she did, she would tear it open first, not waiting for her son. A habit of sticking her nose in other people's business, reading other people's letters, checking other people's pockets. She would unfold the sheet. She would read, "The debt is yours. Pay it yourself. Giselle." And then Ophelia May Van, former assistant principal and the most formidable woman in our district, would make a sound no one had ever heard from her. Something between a scream and a wheeze, making the windows shake and the crystal chandelier above the kitchen table. Her wedding gift to her son, which she never tired of mentioning at every opportunity, would tinkle softly. Danessa met us at the airport in Savannah. A short, full-figured woman in a bright sundress covered in poppies, disheveled from the humidity of the arrivals hall, but with that same open smile Giselle remembered from the instrument plant. Hugging her first, then the children whom she had only seen in photos from rare letters, she immediately led everyone to the exit, chatting nonstop about the weather, which was especially hot this year, about housing prices skyrocketing before the season, and about her husband grumbling about guests. But that's nothing. He's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine anyway. My booker is a good man. He just likes to grumble for order's sake, she explained, loading suitcases into the trunk of a battered Ford Explorer, on the side of which sat a dent the size of a basketball. He'll see y'all and melt like ice cream in the sun, especially when he tries your biscuits. Remember the ones you brought for Mother's Day back then? The Gushins' apartment turned out to be small but cozy. 2 rooms in a low-rise complex without an elevator on the 3rd floor, with a balcony that offered a view of the neighboring house and a narrow strip of ocean shimmering between the roofs. Booker, Danessa's husband, met the guests warily, a large man in his 50s with a weathered face and hands scarred from construction work. He nodded silently and went into the kitchen, where he started rattling dishes. "Don't pay him no mind." Danessa waved her hand, kicking off her sandals in the hallway. "He ain't mean, just not used to folks. He's on the construction site all day cussing with the men, likes quiet at home. But as soon as he finds out you can crochet, he'll be asking for socks. He's always wearing through the heels." That first night, Giselle hardly slept, settled on a folding cot in Danessa's room, while Booker magnanimously moved to the sofa in the living room. Around 3 a.m., trying not to wake her friend, she threw on a cardigan and went out onto the balcony, where the southern night enveloped her in unfamiliar sounds. Cicadas buzzed, the ocean roared somewhere in the distance, and down in the courtyard, drunk voices were arguing about who owed who for liquor. Taking out her phone and turning it over in her hands, she finally decided to turn it on, though she didn't want to. 23 missed calls from Tavarius, 8 from her mother-in-law, and 3 from Nina, her sister-in-law, who always looked at Giselle like she was the help. Voicemails hung like unspooled tapes, but Giselle, imagining what might be on them, decided not to listen and turned the phone off, shoving it back into her pocket. "Can't sleep?" Danessa stepped out onto the balcony with 2 mugs of tea and handed one to Giselle. "First night is always like that. When I moved down here, I couldn't get used to it for a month. Kept feeling like the ocean was going to climb in the window." "Thank you for taking us in." Giselle wrapped her hands around the hot mug. "I know it's—" "Don't even start," Danessa interrupted. "I waited 15 years for that call. Every time you wrote about that mother-in-law and your husband, I thought, Lord, when is she going to run from there? But you kept enduring it, scared. The kids, the money, nowhere to go. The usual excuses. Not excuses, reasons. But you ran now, and that's the main thing." In the morning, contrary to expectations, Booker was in a benevolent mood, devouring a mountain of pancakes Giselle had fried up with visible pleasure, glancing at the guests not with suspicion, but with curiosity. "Listen, Nessie," he suddenly turned to his wife, slathering a 4th pancake with syrup. "Maybe they should stay for good. There's enough room if we squeeze a bit. And your friend cooks. Man, you'll lose your mind. These pancakes taste just like my grandmama's. Rest her soul." "Booker, they just got here," Danessa laughed. "Let folks catch their breath. Get settled." "I'm just saying," Booker shrugged, reaching for a 5th pancake. "The boy can stay in my room, and the girl with her mama. Why should they struggle in rented rooms?" After breakfast, Giselle took the children out onto the balcony, realizing they needed the talk she had been putting off the whole trip. Darius sat on an old stool, squinting from the bright southern sun, so different from Chicago's overcast skies, and Imani settled right on the floor, clutching her battered plush bunny. "Kids, we need to talk seriously," Giselle began, squatting down between them. "You understand that we didn't just leave for a week to rest." "I understand," Darius nodded, without surprise or fear in his voice. "Ma, to be honest, I thought you'd never do it. It was time to bounce a long time ago." Giselle looked at her son, amazed at when he had managed to grow up so much. Just yesterday, it seemed, he was a little boy hiding sketchbooks under his bed so his father wouldn't find them. And now he sat almost grown, with the first fuzz above his lip and an understanding gaze. "And Daddy?" asked Imani quietly, tugging on the bunny's ear. "And Grandma? They're going to look for us. They're going to yell." "Daddy already called. Grandma too. But we aren't going back. You remember how Daddy screamed? How Grandma was always unhappy?" "I remember." Imani lowered her head. "She always said I was messy, and that I stomped too loud, and that I wasted food. She won't say that anymore, I promise." A week later, when they had moved into a rented studio apartment a 30-minute walk from Danessa's, Imani said at dinner, "Ma, you know what? It's so quiet here. No one is yelling. No one is fighting. Can we stay here forever?" The apartment was tiny. One room with peeling wallpaper in the corner, a kitchen the size of a closet, and a bathroom where you had to choose between closing the door and standing at the sink. But it was hers. For the first time in her life, hers. Where no one would enter without knocking. No one would dig through bags or check receipts. "Well, shall we settle in?" Danessa dragged in an old fold-out sofa she'd begged off neighbors on the 5th floor. Not new, of course. A spring pokes out on the edge, but you can sleep on it. Put a thick pillow over it and you won't notice. Then look, with the first paycheck, you'll buy something better. Giselle started looking for work on the second day after the move, realizing that a 15-year gap in her employment history was like a brand for an engineer, but stubbornly sending resumes to all suitable vacancies. Metrologist, lab technician, dispatcher, technician, even a warehouse clerk with knowledge of measuring instruments. Anything where her knowledge, even if a bit rusty, could come in handy. They'll ask about the gap at the interview. Say you were a stay-at-home mom, Danessa advised. 2 kids. Husband insisted you stay home. At the same time, Giselle continued to crochet, posting ads on local websites and social media groups because Southerners willingly ordered summer items: bright crocheted tops, lacy sun hats, and beach tunics. In a week, she gathered 3 orders. Not much, but enough for a start. "Ma, can I sign up for art classes?" Darius asked in the evening as they sat in the kitchen, trying to fit the 3 of them at the tiny table. "There's a community center nearby. I looked online. They take from 16. I'll be just in time." Giselle almost cried, remembering how many years Tavarius had mocked his son's girly hobbies, forcing him to go to wrestling, where larger boys beat him up, calling him not a man, a wimp, and a mama's boy. And Darius still drew secretly at night, hiding albums under the bed, behind the wardrobe, and in old textbooks. "Of course, son. Tomorrow we'll go and see what documents are needed." She turned on the phone once a week on Wednesdays to check messages from crochet clients, and the number of missed calls from Tavarius crossed 100, then 200. The text messages, which she sometimes scanned, changed like the weather. First threats. "I'll find you and make you pay. You'll regret being born. I'll take the kids through court." Then please, "Giselle, come back. We'll discuss everything. Think about the children. Mama is beside herself." And then threats again, interspersed with orders. "Come back immediately. Stop acting foolish. I expect you home tomorrow." Her mother-in-law was more consistent. Her messages didn't change in tone and contained the same words: thief, ungrateful, I'll get you from underground. You'll answer for the children, and where did you put the money? In one message, Ophelia May wrote with indignation that she had tried to track her daughter-in-law through Find My iPhone, but nothing worked. "Are you living in a cave?" A voicemail from her mother-in-law played, which Giselle accidentally clicked. "Walking around with a burner like a homeless person. On purpose, you snake, so you won't be found." 2 weeks later, Giselle simply bought a new SIM card, and the old number faded into oblivion along with her past life. At the end of the first month in Georgia, a call came that Giselle wasn't expecting. Only Danessa and a few customers knew the new number, but an unknown code lit up on the screen. "Giselle Van?" The female voice sounded tired and apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Bernice. Bernice Reynolds. I'm Tavarius Van's first wife." The conversation stretched for 2 hours after switching to video call. Giselle saw a woman in her 40s with premature gray in her dark hair, sad eyes, and a bitter fold near her mouth. "I read about the pyramid scheme in the Chicago News," Bernice explained. "The Vans were mentioned, debts, and I thought, maybe it would be important for you to know that this isn't the first time." Bernice's story mirrored Giselle's history. A young girl, a design engineer, married Tavarius 20 years ago, and from day one encountered a system of total control where the mother-in-law checked receipts. The husband was only interested in reports on what was spent, and she was forbidden to work immediately after the wedding. "Ophelia May tormented me from the first day," Bernice said, mechanically tugging at the edge of her blouse. "I didn't cook right, too salty or too bland. I didn't clean right, missed dust or used too many chemicals, didn't dress right, either like a nun or like, well, you understand, excuse the expression." "And Tavarius?" asked Giselle, though she knew the answer in advance. "Tavarius tried to defend me the first month, maybe 2, and then his mother became more important. She's an elderly person. You have to yield. She has experience. She knows better. Don't argue with Mama. It's not nice." Bernice's departure was an escape in pure form. She packed her things while her husband and mother-in-law were visiting relatives and left for her parents in another city without money or belongings, borrowing fare from a friend. The divorce turned into hell when Ophelia May hired a good lawyer, and they proved that Bernice abandoned her husband without valid reason, so she received nothing. You know what the scariest part is? Bernice looked at the camera, but her gaze was turned inward, into the past. For 20 years I blamed myself. I thought normal women know how to get along with mothers-in-law, and I'm a failure. Maybe I really cooked badly, maybe my character was difficult. And then I read about you and understood. It's a system. She's like that with everyone. You, me. There are probably others. After the conversation, Giselle sat for a long time on the tiny balcony of the rented apartment. Purely symbolic, but still hers. She looked at the city lights and the dark ocean somewhere beyond the houses, thinking about Darius and Imani. What would have happened if she had stayed in Chicago? Darius would have grown up a copy of his father, learning to humiliate women and consider them servants. And Imani would have married someone just like him and repeated her mother's path. Now they had a chance. 3 months later, the police called. Detective Althea Higgins introduced herself politely, even sympathetically. Ms. Van, I am the investigator in the case of the Wealth Builders Financial Pyramid. Your mother-in-law, Ophelia May Van, is listed with us as a victim, but during the investigation, interesting details have emerged. The details turned out to be more than interesting. Tavarius's HVAC and appliance repair company had been unprofitable on paper for the last 5 years, but in reality, large sums of cash passed through it, money being laundered for the very same serious people the mother-in-law now owed. Moreover, continued Higgins, Ophelia May wasn't just a victim. She actively recruited new investors, receiving a percentage. Essentially, she was part of the scheme until she got caught herself. Giselle had to give testimony about family life, finances, and how decisions were made, and she told everything about the total control, the housekeeping money strictly by list, the ban on working, and the confiscated documents. You understand that you are purely a witness, the detective clarified at the end of the conversation. You have no relation to your husband's business, that is obvious. You didn't sign documents, weren't listed in the firm. Thank you for helping the investigation. The climax came a month later, when Danessa burst in on Giselle in the morning with croissants from a new bakery and news. Zell, sit down, sit down. Your man got arrested yesterday right in his office. They took Tavarius in on the full program, fraud on a massive scale, money laundering through the firm, and tax evasion. The investigation dug up a scheme he'd been building for years, together with his mother. Ophelia May also caught a charge for complicity in fraud, but after her son's arrest, she had a heart attack and ended up in the hospital. The court took her age and health condition into account, assigning a suspended sentence and confiscation of property. The former formidable assistant principal left the hospital a broken old woman. The apartment was sold for debts even before the trial. The money went to lawyers who couldn't do anything. Her son was in jail awaiting a verdict that promised to be serious, as investigators found episodes totaling millions of dollars. The power she had reveled in all her life crumbled to dust. There was no one to control, no one to torment, only a state-issued bed in a nursing home where social services placed her. Detective Higgins called a week after Tavarius's arrest, and a note of professional interest sounded in her tired voice, like a doctor discovering a rare case. Ms. Van, your husband insists on a meeting, says he's ready to give testimony only in your presence. It's not mandatory, you understand, but if you agree, it might help the investigation. Giselle remained silent for a long time, examining a palm tree in the courtyard through the window, a southern tree, unusual after Chicago birches, with leaves looking like spread fingers. I'll come, she said finally. I need to tell him something too, I say. The visitation room of the detention center smelled of bleach and something else bureaucratic, hopeless, as if the atmosphere itself was soaked in other people's despair. Tavarius was brought in after 20 minutes of waiting, in handcuffs and a gray jumpsuit that hung on his thinned body like it was on a hanger. Seeing Giselle, he tried to straighten up and portray his former authority, but it came out pitiful, as if a beaten mongrel was trying to snarl. "Giselle," he began, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. "Thanks for coming. This is a misunderstanding. I was set up by these. If you tell the investigator that I wasn't involved in anything like that, if you help with a lawyer—" "I'm filing for divorce," Giselle interrupted calmly, looking him straight in the eyes. "And the children stay with me. That is all I wanted to say." Tavarius's face contorted, as if an invisible mask had been ripped off him, exposing something dark and evil. "You, without me, you are nothing. You'll die in the street. I'll get out. I'll take the kids from you. I'll make your life hell." "For 15 years, I heard that I was nothing." Giselle stood up, pushing back the metal chair, which squeaked nastily on the floor. "But it turns out I'm the only one who could leave. Look at yourself and look at me. Think about that." Walking out of the jail, she felt a strange lightness, as if she had thrown an invisible weight off her shoulders. To Dines's question on the phone, "How did it go?" she answered with one word: free. The trial took place 4 months later in the Cook County Court. In that same building with columns that Giselle had passed hundreds of times, never thinking she would one day end up inside. It was cool in the hall despite the September warmth, and Giselle threw a cardigan over her shoulders, crocheted with her own hands. A small detail, but important, because she was sitting here in a thing created in her new life. Ophelia May sat in the first row, hunched over as if her spine no longer held her authoritative figure, with gray roots grown out a good 2 inches and hands that shook slightly. When she tried to fix the collar of her old-fashioned jacket, no one was nearby. Relatives had turned away and vanished from her life like smoke. "Tell us about the financial relations in your family," asked the prosecutor. A young man with attentive eyes. Giselle spoke evenly, without hysteria, simply stating facts about how she was forced to quit after the birth of her first child, how money was given out strictly by list, with a requirement to account for every penny, how her passport and ID were taken away for safekeeping, and how she lived for 15 years without a voice in her own home. "Why did you endure it for so long?" asked the prosecutor. "Because I thought it was supposed to be that way, because I was afraid to be left alone with 2 children, because I believed that for the sake of family, one must endure." "What made you leave?" "My husband demanded $270,000, everything I had from my mother's inheritance, and even more for his mother's debts. And he said, 'Refuse, and you'll regret it.' I suddenly realized, to them I am not a human being, but an ATM that can be kicked until money falls out." Tavarius was found guilty on all counts. 6 years in a general regime correctional facility, confiscation of property, and a ban on holding leadership positions. While being led out of the hall, he turned to Giselle and silently mouthed something, but she didn't squint to look. She simply turned away toward the window. 6 months later, on a May evening when the southern humidity had already enveloped Savannah, a call came to Giselle's new number. The voice in the receiver was hoarse, with jailhouse slang. "Ms. Van, greetings from Tavarius. Asked to pass it on. Misses you very much, and says you should think about the kiddies. You never know what happens in life. All kinds of things happen." Giselle silently pressed end call, but her hands trembled treacherously, not from fear, but from anger, because even from prison, even after everything, he was trying to pressure, control, and threaten. A call to Detective Higgins didn't take long. "We caught your well-wisher, sat in the same block with Tavarius, recently released. Your ex promised to pay for a preventative chat. Now he's facing an additional charge for threats. Parole is definitely not happening." A year and a half after her escape, Giselle's life found a steady rhythm. Work as a quality assurance engineer at a local instrument manufacturing plant, where she had to pass recertification after a long break, but she managed. The salary was modest but stable, and crocheting brought in extra income as Southerners eagerly ordered light summer clothes. "Ma, look!" Darius burst into the apartment with a certificate in his hands. "Second place in the city contest for a portrait." He had grown in these months, stretching out and squaring his shoulders, but most importantly, the stoop of a hunted teenager had disappeared. Now he drew openly, showing his work with pride and dreaming of art school. "And I got an A in biology," Imani peeked out from behind her brother's back. "Ms. Johnson said if it keeps going like this, I can go to the state Olympiad." In the evenings when the children did their homework, Giselle sat on the balcony with a cup of tea and a notebook, keeping something like a diary, not complaints about life, but reflections on the path traveled. "Strange," she wrote. "I am grateful to Tavarius for that 270,000. If not for his greed, I would have sat in that cage until old age." The letter came 2.5 years after the arrest. A regular white envelope with the return address of the correctional facility in which Tavarius's handwriting had changed, becoming smaller and neater as if he were learning to write anew. "Giselle, I don't know if you'll read this letter. Maybe you'll throw it away without looking. You have the right. For the first time in my life, I'm talking about myself with someone who isn't my mother. I'm starting to understand a lot. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. That call with threats, that was the last stupidity. After the additional term, I finally started thinking not about how to wiggle out, but why I am here at all. I want to ask about the children. Is Darius still drawing? Has Imani gotten used to the new school? I understand I have no right to ask, but maybe someday, if they want, not now when they are ready, if they ever are." Giselle reread the letter 3 times, showed it to Danessa, discussed it, and thought for several days, after which she wrote a short answer. Trust destroyed by years isn't restored by one letter, and she hadn't forgotten that threatening call. But if he was truly working on himself, that was his business. As for the children, that would be their choice when they grew up. 3 years passed. On a summer evening, when the heat subsided and a cool breeze pulled from the ocean, Giselle sat on the balcony of her own studio apartment, which she had managed to buy with the money remaining from her mother's house. 68,000, her entire inheritance. Darius called from Atlanta, where he was studying at an art college. "Ma, I'm going to have a small solo exhibition at the college." "I will definitely come, son." Imani was poring over textbooks, preparing for her exams, and dreaming of entering a marine university to become a biologist and study dolphins. She got hooked after a field trip to the aquarium, and now her whole room was covered in posters of marine animals. "Ma, is it true that dolphins are smarter than people?" she asked, not looking up from the textbook. "Sometimes it seems like they are," Giselle smiled. Danessa arrived with a bottle of wine and fresh news. "Remember Marina who called last fall? Left her husband, rented an apartment, got a job. Says your story helped her decide." Over 3 years, more than 20 women had reached out to Giselle. She wasn't a psychologist or a consultant, just a woman who one day found the strength to leave. So she shared her experience, told her story, and sometimes just listened. The grapevine, as Danessa called it, but it worked. "You know," Giselle poured wine into glasses, "I sometimes think, what would have happened if Tavarius hadn't demanded that money? If he had continued like before, to control, but not threaten openly? You'd still be sitting there," Danessa answered honestly. "Probably. Scary to think about." They were silent, looking at the ocean between the houses. Calm today, gray-blue in the twilight, with rare white caps of waves. 3 years of freedom," said Danessa. 3 years of life," corrected Giselle. "Real life." A new entry appeared in the notebook. "Freedom turned out to be simpler than I thought. You don't need millions. You don't need connections. You don't need someone's permission. You just need to stand up and leave. The hardest part is taking the first step. After that, Your legs carry you themselves. Tomorrow would be a regular day with work, the grocery store, laundry, and a call to Darius. Maybe one of the women who are currently right where she was 4 years ago would call. Giselle would listen, tell how it was for her, and say, "The main thing is, you are stronger than you think. You just don't know it yet." Imani came out onto the balcony and sat nearby. "Ma, I'm glad we left. You know, I sometimes remember that apartment, Grandma, Daddy's threats, like a bad dream." "It was a bad dream, baby girl, from which we woke up." The ocean roared steadily and eternally, belonging to no one and free by its nature. Giselle thought, "I lived 15 years in a cage and only 3 in freedom, but these 3 are worth all the previous ones." Somewhere in a prison up north, a man she once considered her destiny was serving his term. And in a nursing home, a woman was living out her days, having built a system of control that buried her under the rubble. And here, in her apartment by the ocean, lived Giselle Van, quality assurance engineer, mother of 2 children, a free woman. And this was a good finale for a story that began with $270,000 and an envelope on the table. 5 years later, spring arrived early in Savannah. The azaleas had already bloomed in February, filling the air with a sweet scent. Giselle walked along the waterfront, for the first time in a long while alone, without haste and without a specific goal. Darius had turned 23, and he was finishing college, having already received a job offer at an advertising agency. Imani was 19. She was studying marine biology and doing an internship at the Oceanographic Institute. The phone rang in her bag, an unknown number. "Ms. Van? My name is Elena. I'm from Chicago. Marina Peters gave me your number. You helped her 2 years ago." The story was painfully familiar. A tyrant husband, a manipulative mother-in-law, 2 small children, and the fear of leaving into nowhere. "Come on down," said Giselle. "We'll just talk. We'll figure something out. The main thing is, don't be afraid. The fear will pass, but life will remain." Ending the call, she looked at the ocean, endless and free, alive like herself. A story that began with a demand for $270,000 ended with finding something that cannot be bought for any amount of money, the freedom to be oneself. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.